What if I told you Ukraine was never the main player in this war? That behind the front lines, behind the headlines, a much bigger game is being played. A power game between two giants, the United States and Russia, and Ukraine, just a pawn. Billions of dollars in military aid, hundreds of thousands of lives lost, cities turned to rubble, and yet the war drags on. But here's the real question: who is actually benefiting? And more importantly, what happens when the pawn is no longer useful? Let's break it down. For decades, Ukraine has been caught between two empires. To the west, NATO and the U.S., promising security, democracy, and economic aid. To the east, Russia, viewing Ukraine as a vital buffer zone against Western expansion. The result? A country torn apart. The 2014 Maidan Revolution, Russia's annexation of Crimea, the war in Donbass, and now a full-scale invasion. But this isn't just about Ukraine. It's about global power shifts. The U.S. sees Ukraine as a front line to contain Russia. Russia sees Ukraine as an existential threat. And in this brutal war of influence, Ukraine has become the ultimate battleground. But let's ask a tough question. Was this war avoidable? Washington has long denied provoking Russia. But let's look at the facts. Since the 1990s, NATO has expanded. 14 countries once part of the Soviet sphere joined the alliance. In 2008, NATO promised Ukraine and Georgia they could eventually join. For Russia, this was a red line. And when Ukraine's pro-Russian president was overthrown in 2014, Moscow saw it as a US-backed coup. Putin reacted the only way he knew how, by taking Crimea and fueling separatist uprisings. Fast forward to 2021, Biden increases military aid to Ukraine. NATO strengthens its presence in Eastern Europe. And then, Russia invades. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Did Washington miscalculate Russia's response? Did the West push Ukraine into war it could never win? And more importantly, what is the endgame? Since the invasion, the U.S. has sent over $100 billion in aid. But what does Ukraine really get? Western weapons? Yes. Financial support? Yes. A real path to NATO membership? Zelensky keeps asking, when will Ukraine officially join NATO? And the answer, silence. The harsh reality? Ukraine is useful as long as it keeps Russia occupied, as long as it weakens Moscow. But the moment it becomes a liability, it's expendable, just like Afghanistan, just like Vietnam. So the million-dollar question, is Ukraine fighting for its independence or for someone else's interests? Let's talk about something that terrifies Ukraine's leadership. What if Washington and Moscow cut a secret deal? It's not impossible. History tells us that rival powers make unexpected agreements. The US and China partnered against the Soviet Union in the 1970s. Reagan negotiated with Gorbachev in the 1980s. Now, some experts believe that if Trump returns to power, he might push for a peace deal with Russia, a deal that could include ending the war in Ukraine, lifting some sanctions on Russia, guaranteeing Ukraine stays out of NATO. If that happens, Ukraine could be forced into a humiliating compromise. And for all the sacrifices, all the destruction, would Ukraine be left with nothing? Right now, Ukraine is stuck in limbo. It's not winning the war. It's not getting full NATO membership. And Western support is not guaranteed forever. So what are the options? 1. Keep fighting, but for how long? Ukraine is running out of men and ammunition. 2. Negotiate with Russia. But at what cost? Losing territory? Accepting neutrality? 3. Hope for more US support. But what if Washington moves on to other priorities? The brutal truth? Ukraine's fate is not in its own hands. It's in Washington's hands. It's in Moscow's hands. And the worst part? The Ukrainian people, the ones actually suffering, are the ones with the least control. So now we face a harsh reality. Ukraine is fighting not just for its survival, but for its identity. But will it be allowed to decide its own future? Or will it remain a pawn in a global power struggle? The stakes have never been higher, because in geopolitics, pawns are sacrificed first. So what do you think? Is Ukraine truly fighting for its independence or being used as a battleground in a bigger war? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this analysis eye-opening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Because trust me, this story is far from over.